What would you do if someone you trusted with everything, your family, your heart, your children, suddenly decided to take it all away from you? It was a Tuesday morning, one of those peaceful, sunlit days that should have been like any other. I was sitting in the kitchen, sipping my coffee, trying to get the kids ready for school. Sarah, my eldest, was busy with her breakfast, her eyes glued to her phone. Jake, my 9-year-old, was bouncing around the room, already dressed in his school uniform but too excited to sit still. It was a good day, one of those rare, simple moments that makes you feel like everything's in its place. And then my phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but the moment I saw it, my stomach dropped. I hesitated for a second, wondering if it was just another robocall, but something inside told me to answer. As soon as I picked up, I heard a voice that I knew all too well. It was from my ex-husband, Mark. "Hey, you need to get to the courthouse. Now." I froze. "What do you mean? What's going on?" "Just get here," he said, the urgency in his voice unmistakable. "We're going to court." "Court? Why would we be going to court?" Mark and I had been divorced for years, and we had a custody agreement in place. Everything was supposed to be settled, done. But suddenly, the world felt like it was slipping out of my hands. I asked him, "What are you talking about?" "You'll find out when you get there." I couldn't understand it. I felt like my world was being flipped upside down, but I didn't have time to process it. I had to get to that courthouse, and fast. I hung up the phone, the buzz of confusion still ringing in my ears. I looked at Jake and Sarah, who were now both watching me with concern. The kids sensed that something was wrong, but they didn't fully understand what was going on. I knew they wouldn't be able to until it was too late. "Mom. What's happening?" Sarah asked, her tone full of curiosity and worry. "I'll be fine," I said, trying to sound calm, even though I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. "Just stay here. I need to handle something, okay?" Jake, his big brown eyes wide with confusion, looked up at me. "Is everything all right?" I nodded, though I didn't believe my own words. "Yeah, buddy. Everything's fine. Just stay here, and I'll be back soon." I rushed to grab my coat, my hands shaking as I slid it on. My mind was racing. Why was Mark asking me to meet him at the courthouse? And why now? We hadn't had any major issues lately. Sure, things hadn't been perfect since the divorce, but we'd been getting by. We had an arrangement. So why was he suddenly pulling me into a courtroom battle? I tried to shake off the feeling in the pit of my stomach as I drove. The streets blurred by in a haze, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my mind spinning. What could he possibly want? And why wouldn't he tell me over the phone? When I arrived at the courthouse, everything seemed to happen in slow motion. I parked and stood there for a moment, taking a deep breath. There was no going back now. I could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on me. Inside, the halls of the courthouse were sterile, cold, and empty. The echo of my footsteps against the marble floors was the only sound that accompanied me as I made my way to the courtroom. A couple of lawyers and staff members gave me quick, neutral glances as I walked past them. But I was too focused to care about anything else. What was Mark playing at? Why was this happening? As I entered the courtroom, I saw Mark sitting there with his lawyer. His eyes locked onto mine immediately, and I could feel the tension in the room increase. But it wasn't just him, it was everything. The weight of the legal system, the uncertainty of the situation, the fact that we were even here in the first place. "Sit down," Mark said, his voice flat. "The judge will be here soon." I didn't respond. I was still trying to process what was going on. The silence between us was thick, charged with unspoken words. Then, the door opened, and a woman in a black robe stepped in. The judge. She was older, with a stern expression that immediately commanded respect. I'd never been in a courtroom before, and the reality of the situation hit me like a ton of bricks. "Let's get this started," the judge said, looking directly at Mark and me. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. I glanced at the door and saw my children standing just outside, the panic evident on their faces. I couldn't let them in here, not with the storm that was about to break. But before I could react, Mark's lawyer stood up and made a motion. "We're requesting full custody," he said. "And we'd like the children to be placed under Mr. Carpenter's care." The words hit me like a slap to the face. Full custody. Mark wanted full custody of my children. It didn't make sense. We'd always shared custody. We had an agreement, something that worked for everyone, especially for the kids. They needed both of us. So why was he trying to take them away from me? The shock of his request left me speechless for a moment. I could feel my stomach tighten, and the room started to spin. How could this be happening? The judge turned to me. "Do you have a response to this request?" I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. I couldn't find the words. All I could think about was my kids, the life we had built, the bond we had. And now, it felt like everything was slipping through my fingers. But as I looked at the judge, I knew I had to say something. I couldn't let this happen. I couldn't lose them. Not like this. "Your Honor," I finally said, my voice shaking, "I've done everything for them. I'm their mother. I've always been there. I don't understand why this is happening." The judge didn't respond immediately. Instead, she leaned back in her chair and glanced at both lawyers. The tension in the air was unbearable. But it was then that I noticed something that would change everything. Jake and Sarah were standing in the back of the courtroom, clutching each other's hands. And Jake, my brave little boy, looked up at me. I could see the determination in his eyes. In that moment, I knew something was about to happen, something that would turn the tide. Just then, Jake stepped forward, holding something in his hand. It was a letter. "Excuse me, Your Honor," Jake said, his small voice echoing in the courtroom. The judge looked down at him, clearly surprised, but she nodded. "What is this, young man?" Jake walked up to the bench, his steps confident despite the weight of the room. "It's a letter," he said simply. "It's for you." The judge took the letter, and the courtroom fell silent. My heart raced as I wondered what my son had written. What did he want to say? Jake's courage was the spark we needed, and everything was about to change. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Before everything spiraled into this courtroom nightmare, life felt normal. For years, it felt like I had everything I could ever need, a home, a family, and a future full of promise. But the truth was, I had worked hard for that life. I fought for every peaceful moment, every smile, every laugh. I remember when I first met Mark. I was 23, fresh out of college, optimistic and full of hope about the future. He was charming, a little older, confident, and with a quick smile that made me feel like I was the only person in the room. We met at a friend's party, and within an hour, I could tell that there was something magnetic about him. He knew how to make me feel special, how to make me laugh, and how to make everything seem right. We fell in love quickly, swept up in the excitement of building something new together. We got married a year later, a small ceremony at a local church with only a handful of our closest friends. It was perfect, or at least, it felt perfect at the time. We talked about our future, about traveling the world, about having kids, about growing old together. The dream was simple. It was always about the life we'd build, the family we'd create. And when Sarah was born, our world expanded in ways I hadn't even imagined. She was a miracle. Mark was by my side through it all, late-night feedings, doctor's appointments, the long days and even longer nights. I remember the first time Sarah smiled at me, her little hand reaching out for mine, and I felt a love that was deeper than anything I had ever known. 2 years later, Jake came along. He was a force from the start. While Sarah was calm and observant, Jake was curious and restless. He had that wild energy that made you laugh and sigh in the same breath. I found myself thinking that life would always be this perfect. Sarah and Jake, Mark and me, the perfect family. But what I didn't realize was that beneath the surface, things were slowly beginning to crack. The cracks didn't appear all at once. At first, it was just small things. Mark working late more often, missing family dinners, his temper flaring over little things. But I told myself it was just stress, the pressure of being the breadwinner, of keeping everything together. I didn't question it. After all, he was providing for us, and we were doing well. But somewhere along the way, the distance between us started to grow. Our arguments became louder, more frequent, and eventually, we began to fall into a pattern. I would try to talk to him, but he'd brush me off. He'd say things like, "I'm fine, just tired," or "You're overreacting." And I, too afraid to acknowledge that something was wrong, began to withdraw. The emotional connection between us, once so strong, began to fray. And then came the day that shattered it all. The day Mark told me he didn't want to be married anymore. Just like that, everything changed. There was no big fight, no warning. He just sat me down one evening and said it, as if he'd been planning it for months. He didn't love me anymore, and he wanted a divorce. I was blindsided. I couldn't understand how this man, the man who had once told me that he couldn't imagine life without me, could be sitting here saying these words to me. The weeks that followed were a blur. The kids didn't understand what was happening. They were too young to grasp the complexities of relationships, but they could feel the tension in the house. Sarah would ask, "Why is Dad leaving?" And all I could do was hold her and promise her that everything would be okay. It wasn't. Nothing was okay. Mark moved out, and I was left to pick up the pieces. I remember the first few months after the divorce, trying to navigate this new normal. The kids were sad, confused, and angry. They'd ask for their dad, and I'd give them answers I didn't believe myself. "He's just away for a while," I'd tell them, but I could see the uncertainty in their eyes. And I tried. I tried my best to keep our family intact, even if it was just the three of us now. I worked harder than I ever had, balancing a full-time job with being there for my kids every single day. I went to PTA meetings, I made school lunches, I stayed up late helping Sarah with her homework, and I listened to Jake's endless stream of questions about everything. It wasn't easy, but I did it because I loved them, and I wanted them to feel safe, to feel like nothing was broken. For a while, things were okay. It wasn't perfect, it couldn't be. But it was manageable. I thought that maybe, just maybe, we could all find a way to move on. I started dating again, cautiously, but it never felt right. Every time I met someone new, there was this nagging feeling that I was betraying the family I had worked so hard to build. And deep down, I couldn't help but wonder if Mark was doing the same thing, building a life with someone else, leaving us behind. Then came the moment that made everything worse. Mark filed for full custody of the kids. I thought I was prepared for the worst, but this was something I hadn't seen coming. I couldn't understand why he wanted them now, after everything we'd been through. It felt like a betrayal, a slap in the face. He had been out of their lives for so long, and now he wanted to take them away from me. I could barely breathe when I got the papers. They said he was requesting full custody, that I wasn't fit to care for them. It was the lowest blow I'd ever experienced. And I knew, in that moment, that things were about to get a whole lot harder. But what hurt even more than the idea of losing my kids was knowing that they were about to be dragged into the middle of this. They didn't deserve this. They didn't deserve to be caught in the crossfire of our broken marriage. They didn't deserve the pain that was coming. It was only when I stood in the courtroom, listening to Mark's lawyer demand full custody, that I realized just how far this fight was going to go. My heart broke at the thought of them being torn away from me, and yet, somehow, I knew I had to keep fighting. The days after the courtroom scene were a blur. The tension in my chest never seemed to go away. It was like a constant knot, one that tightened with each passing hour. I had spent hours thinking about the way Mark had presented his case, how easily he had walked into that courtroom with his lawyer, ready to take my kids away from me. It was as if he had already made up his mind. And what hurt more than anything was that I had no idea what had triggered it. What did he think was so wrong with me? With our family? At night, after the kids had gone to bed, I would lie awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to make sense of it all. I couldn't understand it. I couldn't even bring myself to talk to anyone about it. What could I say? How could I explain the helplessness I felt? No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't seem to put the pieces together. Sarah, being her usual observant self, picked up on the change in the air. She had always been sensitive to my emotions, even when I tried to hide them. One night, as I tucked her into bed, she asked, "Mom, are you okay? You look sad." I forced a smile, smoothing her hair away from her forehead. "I'm just tired, sweetie. But I'll be fine. You don't need to worry about me." But Sarah wasn't convinced. She leaned up and hugged me tight, pressing her cheek against mine. "I love you, Mom. We're a team, right?" I fought back the tears. "Yeah, kiddo. We're a team." Jake, on the other hand, was less perceptive but no less affected. His usual energy had been replaced by restlessness. He would ask questions I wasn't ready to answer. "Why does Dad want to take us away?" he asked one morning over breakfast, his voice small and hesitant. I was caught off guard. For a moment, I didn't know how to respond. The question hung in the air between us, and I could feel the weight of it. How could I explain this to him? How could I explain a fight that was so much bigger than both of us? I knelt down beside him, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sometimes, grown-ups don't make the best choices, buddy. But I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. And no matter what, we'll always be together, okay?" Jake didn't seem entirely convinced, but he nodded. I could see the confusion in his eyes. He didn't fully understand what was happening, but he knew something was wrong. And that broke my heart all over again. The following week, we were back in court. I couldn't breathe. The thought of facing Mark again, knowing what he was trying to do, was unbearable. I tried to prepare myself, but no matter how much I told myself to stay strong, my stomach churned with dread. When we entered the courtroom, it felt even colder than the first time. Mark sat at the same table, his eyes fixed ahead, like he was waiting for a confrontation. His lawyer, a sharp-dressed man with an air of arrogance, sat next to him, glancing over the papers in front of him as if everything was a mere formality. I hated the smugness of it all. How could they act like this was a simple matter? Like they were talking about property, not the lives of my children? I sat down at the table, clutching my purse in my lap, trying to control my shaking hands. My attorney, a kind woman named Elizabeth, placed a reassuring hand on mine. She gave me a small nod, as if to say, "We've got this." But I wasn't sure anymore. It felt like I was losing control of everything I had worked so hard to protect. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. She was an older woman, with glasses perched on the end of her nose, her gaze piercing as she surveyed everyone in the room. She called the court to order, and the proceedings began. Mark's lawyer stood first, going through a list of reasons why my custody of the kids should be questioned. He mentioned things like my work schedule and how I had to travel frequently for business. He pointed out how the kids often stayed with my mother or my sister when I was out of town. The words stung, each one of them like a slap across the face. Then it was my turn. Elizabeth stood up and gave her statement, defending my ability to care for the kids, pointing out how involved I was in their lives, how I made sure they had everything they needed. She emphasized the importance of stability for the children and how the current custody arrangement had worked for years without any issues. I listened to her, grateful for her support, but I still couldn't shake the nagging feeling in my chest. But then something happened. As we were going through the details of the case, something Mark said caught my attention. His words were casual, like he was talking about some abstract idea rather than the future of his own children. "You know," Mark said, looking at the judge, "I believe it's in the best interest of the kids to have a stable and permanent home. My current girlfriend and I are in a good place, and I think we could provide a better environment for them than what they have now." I could feel the blood drain from my face. His new girlfriend? Was he seriously using her as a reason to take my children from me? The room seemed to close in around me. I looked at Sarah and Jake, who were sitting in the back, watching everything unfold. And suddenly, I wasn't sure how much longer I could keep this fight up. It wasn't just about the legal battle anymore. It was about who would be there for them when they needed someone, who would be the one to comfort them after a bad day, to laugh with them over silly things, to hold their hands when they were scared. I couldn't lose that. I couldn't lose them. As the argument continued, I found myself slipping into a daze, my mind numb. But then something unexpected happened. Jake, the little boy who had barely spoken in court, stood up and walked to the front. The eyes of the entire room turned to him as he approached the judge. "Excuse me, Your Honor," Jake said, his voice clear and steady. The judge, surprised but intrigued, nodded. "Yes, young man." Jake held out a piece of paper, a letter. He didn't look nervous. Instead, he seemed determined, like he knew exactly what he was doing. "I wrote this," he said simply. I could barely breathe. My heart was in my throat as the judge took the letter. I didn't know what he had written, but I knew it was something important. In that moment, Jake became the voice we needed. He wasn't just my son anymore. He was the one standing up for our family. And suddenly, the tables began to turn. The courtroom went silent. It was as though time itself had frozen when Jake stood up. Every eye in the room was on him, the judge, the lawyers, even Mark and his attorney, who suddenly seemed to be less confident. Jake, my little boy, with his messy hair and scuffed shoes, was standing there in front of the judge, holding the letter he had written, and for a split second, I forgot everything. I forgot about the battle, about the custody, about the years of hurt. All I could see was my son, so brave, so sure of himself. The judge, looking at him curiously, took the letter from Jake's outstretched hand. There was a faint smile on her face as she examined the paper, her glasses perched at the tip of her nose. She didn't open it immediately but instead glanced at Jake, giving him a moment to speak. "Your Honor," Jake said again, this time more firmly, "this is for my mom. She's the best mom in the world. And I want to stay with her. She's always there for me. She loves me and Sarah. Please don't let her lose us." It was simple. It wasn't rehearsed. It wasn't even long. But it was pure and true. It was his heart speaking, the heart of a child who just wanted to be with his family. The judge looked at the letter and then back at Jake. Her expression softened, a rare flicker of emotion passing over her face. She nodded, acknowledging the courage it must have taken for him to stand there, to speak up, in the midst of all the legal jargon and adult decisions swirling around him. Mark shifted uncomfortably in his seat, but he didn't say a word. His lawyer glanced down at the papers in front of him, maybe trying to come up with a counter to the rawness of Jake's plea. But in that moment, it felt like everything had shifted. The words Jake had spoken hung in the air, heavier than any argument I had made. The judge finally opened the letter, reading it in front of everyone. She read it aloud, her voice calm but carrying a weight that seemed to sink into the hearts of everyone in the room. "Dear Judge. My name is Jake. I am 7 years old. I love my mom. She always makes sure I'm okay, even when I'm sad or scared. She takes care of me and my sister Sarah. And she makes us laugh when we're upset. I don't want to live with anyone else. I want to stay with my mom because she's the best. She's my mom and she's my home. Please don't make her lose us. Love, Jake. There was a long pause as the room absorbed the weight of the letter. For a moment, even I had to take a breath, wiping away a tear that I hadn't even realized had fallen. The judge looked up from the letter, her expression unreadable. I could feel the air shift, like the power in the room had subtly but undeniably changed. This wasn't just a custody case anymore. It was no longer about legal documents or who had the better lawyer. It was about the heart of a child who was trying to protect the one thing he knew was right, his family. The silence was broken when the judge finally spoke, her voice firm but compassionate. Thank you, Jake. Your letter was very brave, and I can see how much you love your mother and your sister. She turned to Mark and his lawyer, her tone no longer cold but purposeful. I've heard what both sides have presented, but I must consider what is best for the children involved. This letter has given me new insight into the family dynamic, and I will take it into serious consideration. Mark's lawyer opened his mouth to speak, but the judge held up her hand. I think we've heard enough for today. We will reconvene in 2 days to make a ruling. In the meantime, I ask both parties to reflect on what is truly in the best interest of the children. It was over for the day, but the weight of that final statement was not lost on anyone. As the judge stood up and the court adjourned, I barely noticed the movement around me. My legs felt like they were made of jelly as I walked out of the courtroom with Jake and Sarah, both of them holding onto my sides like they were afraid they'd fall apart too. Jake was quiet as we made our way down the hallway, his small hand gripping mine. I had no idea what was going through his mind, but I knew he had done something extraordinary. He had done what I couldn't, he had spoken the truth. He had spoken from the heart, and that had been enough to make a difference. We got into the car, and I couldn't help but glance over at Jake in the rearview mirror. He was sitting there, looking out the window, seemingly lost in thought. Jake, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Thank you. You were so brave. You helped us so much. He glanced at me, his face still serious, but his eyes held something that made my heart swell with pride. I just want to stay with you, Mom. You're all I need. I couldn't speak for a moment. His words hit me like a wave, and I had to blink back the tears that threatened to spill over. He had no idea how much that meant to me. How much I needed him to say that. Because the truth was, I wasn't sure how I could have gone on without him. As we drove home, I couldn't help but think about the letter, about how it had made the judge see what Mark's lawyer couldn't. That the kids weren't just pieces to be fought over, but real, living beings with emotions, with fears, with love for their mother. They weren't pawns in a game. They were my world. And I would do whatever it took to keep them in it. The next 2 days felt like an eternity. We waited in limbo, unsure of what the judge would decide. But one thing was certain, Jake had given me a new strength, a new sense of purpose. No matter what happened in the end, I knew I had to keep fighting. Because my kids, Sarah and Jake, were worth every fight. And so, I prepared for the next phase of this battle, determined more than ever to protect my family. 2 days. 2 long, agonizing days. The hours seemed to stretch on endlessly, each one feeling like it was filled with uncertainty, dread, and hope all at once. It was like we were suspended in time, waiting for the final decision that would shape our futures. In the meantime, I couldn't stop thinking about the letter. Jake's letter. How in those few short sentences, he had captured the essence of everything I had been fighting for them, for us. It wasn't just about a mother trying to keep her children. It was about love, stability, and the bond that couldn't be easily broken, no matter what anyone tried to say. We didn't talk much in the days leading up to the judge's decision. Sarah had her own way of coping, keeping herself busy with her drawings, her books, and her little world that she created around her. Jake, on the other hand, was unusually quiet, almost withdrawn, but I knew he was thinking about the letter too. He had done something incredible, something brave. But I could see the burden in his eyes, the weight of it all. I tried my best to reassure him, but I wasn't sure if he felt the same peace I was trying to project. The uncertainty hung over us like a cloud. The morning of the hearing was crisp, the air sharp with an early chill that seemed to match the tightness in my chest. I wanted to be hopeful. I wanted to believe that what Jake had done, what we had all done, would be enough to keep us together. But I also couldn't ignore the nagging fear that still clung to me. What if the judge didn't see it the way we did? What if Mark's case, his lawyer's arguments, were stronger than the simple truth of a child's plea? But there was no turning back now. We had to face the music. We arrived at the courthouse early, the sound of our footsteps echoing through the marble halls. The kids were unusually quiet as we made our way into the courtroom. I could tell that they were both nervous, probably just as unsure as I was about what would happen. I held on to their hands tightly, trying to offer some comfort, even if I couldn't fully give it to myself. The courtroom was more crowded than it had been last time. The tension in the air was palpable as everyone took their seats. Mark and his lawyer were already there, sitting in the same positions as before, exuding that same cold confidence. But this time, I didn't let it get to me. I had Jake's letter, and in my heart, I knew that no matter the outcome, we had done everything we could. We had fought with everything we had. Elizabeth, my attorney, sat beside me, her expression calm but sharp, ready for whatever might come. She gave me a reassuring smile before turning her attention to the judge as she entered. The judge, a woman with a reputation for being fair but firm, didn't waste any time. She called the court to order and began the proceedings. This time, however, there was an air of finality, a sense that something significant was about to unfold. The judge, after going through some preliminary statements, turned to Mark and his lawyer. They made their case once again, presenting their arguments as they had before. But this time, I didn't feel the sting of their words as much. I was focused on the kids, on Jake and Sarah. They were the reason I was here. They were the reason I was fighting. And nothing anyone could say would change the truth of that. After Mark's lawyer finished, it was my turn. Elizabeth stood and began her statement, laying out everything we had discussed, everything we had worked for. But when she got to Jake's letter, she paused, taking a deep breath before speaking. "Your Honor," Elizabeth said, "we've presented our case, and now I would like to present something else, something that I believe speaks more powerfully than anything I or my client could ever say. This is a letter written by Jake, the younger of the two children involved. It's brief, but it speaks volumes about the love and connection between him and his mother." She looked at me for a moment before handing the letter to the judge. I held my breath as the judge opened it, just as she had done before. I couldn't help but feel a wave of pride as I watched her read it again. Jake's words had been so simple, so honest. And for a brief moment, I saw the judge's expression soften as she read. She didn't look at me, but I could tell she was taking in every word. Once she finished, she looked up at Mark and his lawyer, her face unreadable. She didn't speak for a few moments, as if letting the weight of Jake's letter sink in. Then, finally, she addressed the room. "Thank you for presenting your cases," she began, her voice steady and calm. "This has been a challenging and emotional matter. But as I have had the chance to reflect on the evidence presented, including the powerful words of young Jake, it is clear to me that these children have a deep bond with their mother. And it is clear that this bond is what is in their best interest." A rush of relief flooded through me. It was happening. The decision was coming. And I could see it in the judge's eyes, she was on our side. "Therefore, I am ruling in favor of the current custody arrangement," the judge continued, her voice firm. "The children will remain with their mother. I have considered the arguments presented by both sides, but ultimately, the emotional and psychological well-being of these children is paramount. It is clear to me that they are best served by remaining in their current home, with their mother." My heart skipped a beat. For a moment, everything around me disappeared. I couldn't even hear the rest of the judge's words. All I could focus on was the fact that we had won. We had won. Tears welled in my eyes as I looked at Jake and Sarah, who were sitting quietly beside me, their faces a mix of confusion and relief. Jake's eyes met mine, and I could see the question in them: had we really done it? I gave him a smile that I hoped conveyed everything I felt. We were staying together. We were safe. The gavel came down, and the judge declared the case officially closed. It was over. And though the journey had been long and exhausting, it had brought us to this moment, a moment where, despite everything, we had come out on top. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my emotions. This wasn't just a legal victory. It was a victory for our family, for everything we had fought for, and for everything we had lost along the way. But in the end, we had won. And that was all that mattered. The drive home from court was quieter than I expected. You'd think there would be cheering, celebration, maybe even some triumphant music playing in the background. But it wasn't like that. Not because we weren't happy, we were, but because we were all tired. Tired in a way that seeps into your bones. We had won the battle, yes, but the war had left scars. I glanced at the rearview mirror and saw Jake staring out the window, his face pressed lightly to the glass. Sarah was beside him, sketching absently in a little notepad she carried everywhere. Their silence didn't worry me, it felt like the kind that comes after a storm, the kind that's filled with quiet relief. "Are we really staying home, Mom?" Jake asked softly, breaking the silence as we pulled into our driveway. I put the car in park and turned to face him. "Yes, sweetheart. You're staying home. With me. Where you belong." He didn't say anything for a second. Then, with a small, tired smile, he said, "Okay." Inside, everything felt the same, and yet not. The furniture hadn't changed. The photos were still in their frames. But there was a new energy in the air, a sense of safety, of permanence. We weren't living under the threat of being torn apart anymore. That night, I tucked them into bed the way I had 1,000 times before, but it felt different. More sacred. I kissed Jake's forehead, and he reached for my hand before I could stand up. "You're not mad at me for writing the letter, right?" The question caught me off guard. Mad? I shook my head, sitting on the edge of his bed again. "Jake, you gave that judge something nobody else could. You told the truth. And you did it with so much courage. I'm not mad. I'm proud. So proud." His eyes fluttered shut with a soft smile. "I just wanted to stay with you. That's all." My voice caught a little. "You gave me the greatest gift, sweetheart. You reminded everyone, including me, what love really means." When I left his room, I lingered in the hallway for a long time. It hit me all over again, we were safe. I didn't have to live in fear anymore. But I also knew things couldn't just go back to how they were before. We had to move forward, different than we were, but stronger for it. Over the next few weeks, we did just that. We found a rhythm again. Mornings were filled with cereal boxes, cartoon debates, and lost shoes. Afternoons brought homework chaos and soccer practice. And at night, we fell into routines that slowly stitched our days back together. I started therapy, not just for myself, but with the kids. I needed them to have a space to talk about everything they had been through, the confusion, the fear, the sadness. Sarah opened up more than I expected, sharing how scared she'd been that Mark might take them away. Jake was quieter, but his drawings spoke volumes, pictures of a house with 3 stick figures holding hands. One session, Sarah asked me, "Why did Dad want to take us?" The question was like a pin to the heart. But I answered honestly, gently. Sometimes, grown-ups make decisions based on their own pain. Not because of anything you did. Your dad thought he was doing what was best. But now, the judge decided what's really best. And that's being here, with me. With each other. They nodded, accepting it in the way kids do, still full of questions, but willing to trust your answer for now. Mark called a few times after the court ruling. At first, I didn't know if I should even answer. But eventually, I picked up. He wasn't angry. Not anymore. If anything, he sounded deflated. Like he knew the fight had cost him more than he expected. "I never meant to hurt them," he said one night over the phone. "I just thought, maybe they'd be better off with me." "I know," I said. And I did believe that he thought it, even if he had gone about it all wrong. But the truth is, you left. And I was the one who stayed. I was the one who held them through the storms. There was silence on the other end, then a sigh. "I get that now." I didn't know what the future held for his relationship with the kids. I wasn't going to force them to see him or keep him away, either. That choice would be theirs, with guidance and support. I just knew that whatever happened, it wouldn't come at the cost of their stability again. One Sunday morning, a few months after the final hearing, Jake came into the kitchen holding a crumpled piece of paper. "What's this?" I asked, taking it from him. He shrugged. "Just something I wrote." I unfolded it and read. "Home is where someone waits for you every day. Where hugs are warm. Where pancakes are burnt sometimes, but still taste good. Home is Mom." Tears filled my eyes, and I reached out, pulling him into a hug so tight he laughed. "I'm framing this," I said. And I did. That letter, that little poem, now hangs on the wall above our dinner table, right beside one of Sarah's drawings. It's crooked and written in messy handwriting, but it's perfect. It reminds me every day that even though the road was long, even though the fight was hard, we made it. And we made it together. Winning in court didn't mean life just picked up and moved on without friction. In fact, in some ways, it got more complicated. The legal decision had been made, but emotionally, the dust hadn't quite settled. The kids were back in school, trying to find their footing again, and I was juggling work, therapy, and rebuilding our day-to-day normal. But normal wasn't something you just slipped back into after being dragged through a custody war. Mark wasn't out of the picture. The court had awarded me primary custody, but he still had visitation rights every other weekend. I had agreed, reluctantly. Because I believed the kids deserved a chance to have a relationship with their father, even if it had to be carefully monitored at first. The first weekend was awkward, to say the least. Mark showed up at the house exactly at 10 a.m., right on schedule. He was trying too hard, clean-shaven, new clothes, even a box of donuts in hand like that could erase the months of tension and silence. Sarah was hesitant. Jake stayed half-hidden behind me. "Hey, guys," Mark said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "I thought we could go to the zoo today. What do you think?" Sarah nodded, though she didn't smile. Jake looked at me for reassurance. I knelt down beside him. "It's just a few hours, okay? I'll be right here when you come back." He leaned in and whispered, "But what if he tries to keep us?" My heart cracked. I hugged him tightly. "He can't. The judge said so. And I promise, you're always coming home to me." Reluctantly, Jake followed Sarah out the door, and they climbed into Mark's car. I stood there on the porch long after they left, staring down the street like I could will time to move faster. I trusted the system, but not fully. And I didn't trust Mark's instincts, not yet. When they returned that evening, both kids were quiet. Not upset, but not excited either. Just, off. "Everything okay?" I asked as I helped them out of the car. Mark gave a forced laugh. "We had fun. Didn't we, guys?" Sarah nodded vaguely. Jake didn't say anything. I didn't push them to talk that night. I made dinner, we watched a movie, and they went to bed early. But after I tucked them in, I sat alone on the couch, a growing pit in my stomach. The next morning over breakfast, Jake finally spoke up. "Dad said you made him leave." I stopped cold, the spoon halfway to my mouth. What? He said you kicked him out and that's why he doesn't live here anymore. He said you didn't want him. I took a deep breath. I had promised myself I'd never badmouth Mark to the kids, no matter how angry I was. But now I had to clean up his version of the truth, without poisoning the well. That's not exactly what happened, I said carefully. Your dad and I had a lot of problems. Grown-up problems. We tried to fix them, but it didn't work. He made the choice to leave, and I made the choice to protect you both and build a home where you'd feel safe. That's all. Jake nodded slowly. Okay. But I could tell he was still confused. Hurt, even. He was trying to sort through two versions of the same story, and I hated that Mark had put him in that position. And that was just the beginning. Each weekend visit seemed to leave new emotional shrapnel. Sarah started withdrawing. Jake became more clingy. They weren't misbehaving, but the shift was clear, more arguments between them, more anxiety at bedtime, more questions I couldn't easily answer. Why does Dad have a new girlfriend already? Why can't he just live here again? If he loves us, why did he go to court to take us away? One night, Sarah finally broke. We were sitting on her bed, brushing out her hair, when she burst into tears. I hate going there, she cried. I hate pretending everything's okay. He asks about you, but he says bad stuff like you're trying to ruin his life. I don't want to lie, Mom. I don't want to hear it. I wrapped her in my arms, my chest tightening as she sobbed into my shirt. You never have to lie, I whispered. And you don't have to pretend. Not with me. And not with him either, if you don't feel safe. What do I do if he says bad things about you? You tell me. Always tell me. And if it keeps happening, we'll go back to the court. You don't ever have to be around someone who makes you feel small or scared. She sniffled. Even if it's our dad. Even then. That week, I documented everything, conversations, behavior changes, anything that could be used if we had to go back to court to modify the visitation agreement. I wasn't trying to cut him out, but I wasn't going to let his unresolved anger damage my kids, either. Elizabeth, my lawyer, reviewed the documentation and gave me a plan. If this continues, we can request supervised visitation or mandate therapy between him and the kids. The judge may not revoke visitation outright, but if the visits are clearly harming them, there are legal steps we can take. I nodded, but deep down, it made me sick. I didn't want to spend more time in court. I didn't want more paperwork, more testimonies, more stress. I just wanted peace. But peace, it seemed, would have to be earned. And protected. Still, something had changed. I was no longer afraid. Not like before. I had survived the worst of it, and now, I had the strength to keep going, not just for myself, but for Sarah and Jake. They were watching me. And I was going to show them that strength doesn't always mean fighting. Sometimes, it means standing your ground. Quietly. Steadily. Without letting fear push you around. Because the storm may have passed, but the aftershocks. They were just beginning. Just when I thought we were finally finding our footing again, the letter came. It was from Mark's attorney, slipped into my mailbox like an unwelcome ghost. A single envelope, light as air but heavy with implications. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at it while Jake and Sarah played in the living room, their laughter spilling into the silence like a song from a different life. Inside the envelope, a request for court-ordered mediation. It wasn't a new custody battle, not yet. But Mark had filed a motion to revisit the parenting agreement, citing alienation and a lack of cooperation in facilitating a healthy relationship with the children. I blinked hard, my jaw tightening. Was this really happening again? Elizabeth, my attorney, didn't look surprised when I brought her the letter. He's not giving up, she said simply, flipping through the paperwork with professional detachment. This is common after someone loses primary custody. He's trying to force you into a corner, maybe even hoping you'll give up something to avoid the fight. I clenched my fists. He's saying I'm turning the kids against him. That I'm the one creating tension. Elizabeth met my gaze. That's classic deflection. But we'll go. We'll be prepared. Mediation isn't court, it's not legally binding unless you agree to something. So don't. Unless it's in your kid's best interest. So, I agreed to attend. I wasn't scared this time, just tired. Exhausted by the constant need to prove myself. But I showed up anyway, because if this was another test of my resilience, I was going to pass. The mediation center was sterile, too brightly lit, with beige walls and artificial plants. It smelled like ink and hand sanitizer. Mark was already there when I arrived, dressed in a pressed button-down shirt like he was applying for a job. His lawyer sat beside him, smug as ever. I didn't make eye contact. I focused on the mediator, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a clipboard full of other people's pain. "We're here to find common ground," she began. Mark jumped in before she could finish. "I just want to be a father to my kids." I bit back a laugh. Not because it wasn't a noble statement, but because of the irony. Where was that energy when he walked out on us? Where was that fight when Jake was learning to read or Sarah had nightmares at 2 a.m.? The mediator turned to me. "How do you feel about the current arrangement?" "It's working," I said, carefully. "But the kids are coming back from visits confused and emotionally shaken. My only goal is to protect their stability and well-being." Mark leaned forward, his voice sharp. "That's your version of the truth. You poison them against me every chance you get." "That's not true," I said, trying to stay calm. "They're reacting to how you treat them. Sarah cries after almost every visit. Jake asked if you were trying to take him away again. That's not something I planted in their heads." He scoffed. "You're manipulating them." The mediator raised a hand. "Let's focus on specifics. Mr. Davis, what exactly are you proposing?" Mark cleared his throat. "I want to increase my time. I want full weekends, not just every other one. And I want to be able to pick them up from school sometimes. I want to be part of their daily lives again." My heart skipped. That wasn't just extra time, that was encroachment. Uncertainty. Disruption of a life we had fought hard to stabilize. "And what about therapy?" I asked. "Because the kids have been in it for months now. They're just starting to open up. Are you willing to go to counseling with them? Let a neutral therapist weigh in on what they need." Mark hesitated. "I don't think therapy is necessary if I can just spend more time with them." "Therapy is necessary," I said, heat rising in my voice. "Not because I said so, but because they need it. You're asking to be part of their daily lives without doing the daily work to repair what you broke." Elizabeth chimed in calmly. "We're not agreeing to anything that undermines the children's emotional health. If there's a therapist involved, we're open to a neutral third-party evaluation, but we won't entertain changes based solely on conjecture." The mediator jotted something down. "I can't force either of you to agree," she said slowly. "But if we're going to move forward, I suggest a temporary plan, keep the current schedule, but add a family therapy session where Mr. Davis is invited, observed by the therapist. From there, a professional can make a recommendation." It was the compromise she thought we might both accept. I looked at Elizabeth. She gave a small nod. Mark frowned. "Fine. But I'm not going to some shrink who already thinks I'm the bad guy." The mediator looked at him evenly. "Then you may be wasting everyone's time." And that was it. The session ended with no real changes, but a door left open. A door I would only walk through if it led to healing, not chaos. Back home, I didn't tell the kids about mediation. Not yet. I just held them close, read them an extra bedtime story, and watched them sleep for longer than usual. Later that night, I stood in the doorway of Jake's room, watching him breathe peacefully under his dinosaur blanket. I thought about the future, about the possibility of another legal battle. Another fight. Another round of justifying why love wasn't a courtroom argument, but a daily action. And in that moment, I made a silent vow. If he came at us again, I'd be ready. But I wouldn't let his anger become their burden. I would protect their peace, even if it meant going back into the fire. Because that's what mothers do. It started with a note slipped into Jake's backpack. At first, I thought it was just another worksheet he'd forgotten to hand in. A half-crumpled piece of paper at the bottom of his bag. But when I unfolded it, my stomach dropped. It was a letter. From Mark. Handwritten. 2 pages long. I read the first line, and everything in me tensed. Jake, I know your mom doesn't tell you the whole truth. So here's mine. I didn't even finish the rest. My hands were shaking too much. I stared at the paper, bile rising in my throat. This wasn't just a violation of boundaries, it was manipulation, plain and simple. He wasn't just talking to Jake, he was trying to drive a wedge between us. To twist the truth in a way only someone desperate would try. I sat at the kitchen table, the note burning in my hand. Elizabeth needed to see it. The therapist, too. But first, I had to talk to Jake. That night, after Sarah went to bed, I gently knocked on his door. Hey, buddy, I said, trying to keep my voice light. Can we talk for a minute? He nodded, setting down his comic book. I sat on the edge of his bed, holding the letter without showing it to him yet. Did Dad give you something to put in your backpack? He nodded slowly, eyes wide. He said it was just for me. He said not to show you. There it was. The worst part. He was trying to create secrets between them, divide us. Undermine the one thing we'd fought so hard to protect, trust. I took a breath. Jake, I found the letter. And I want you to know something. You can always tell me the truth. No matter what. There's nothing you ever have to hide from me. Jake looked down at his blanket. He said you told me lies. About why he left. I swallowed hard. You remember when I told you that grown-ups sometimes say things from a place of hurt? That's one of those things. I haven't lied to you. I told you what really happened, in the way I thought you could understand. If there's ever anything you want to ask me, you can. I won't hide from it. He was quiet for a long time. Then he looked up. Are we going to have to go back to court? I wanted to say no. I wanted to wrap him in a shield from everything messy and adult and painful. But I had made a promise, never to lie. Maybe, I said. But if we do, it's not your fault. It's not about you doing anything wrong. It's about keeping things fair and safe for everyone. He nodded again, slowly, like he was bracing for a storm he couldn't see but could already feel in his bones. After he fell asleep, I emailed Elizabeth the scanned letter. Her reply came an hour later. This is a serious breach. It's clear emotional manipulation. We can escalate this. We scheduled a meeting with the therapist, and she was just as concerned. Jake is already fragile, she said. A letter like this introduces doubt and guilt. It's an attempt to turn the child into the parent. That's not okay. Mark was called in for a mandatory session. He showed up defensive, arms crossed, refusing to admit fault. I just wanted to give him the truth, he said. If she gets to talk to them all the time, why can't I? Because you're not writing a journal, the therapist said bluntly. You're shaping a child's perception of his mother and himself. That's not parenting, that's campaigning. For the first time, Mark didn't have a quick comeback. I didn't say much in that session. I didn't need to. The therapist made it clear that this behavior would be documented. And if it continued, it could result in a formal recommendation to modify visitation. The warning hung in the air like a loaded gun. Afterward, Elizabeth and I filed a formal complaint. It was time to make it official. If Mark was going to play this game, we'd answer it through the law. But the emotional toll was another matter. Jake became more withdrawn. Sarah started acting out, getting frustrated over the smallest things: spilled cereal, missing pencils, someone looking at her the wrong way. The house felt like it was holding its breath. One night, I caught Jake sitting in the dark in his room, staring at the moon outside his window. "You okay?" I asked gently. "I just wish it was over," he whispered. "All of it." I sat beside him, wrapping an arm around his shoulders. "Me too," I said. "But I promise you something, Jake. We're going to be okay. No matter what. And you don't have to figure this all out. That's my job, not yours." He leaned into me, quiet again. I knew then that the damage Mark had done with that letter wasn't about custody, it was about confusion. Doubt. Fear. And I couldn't let it happen again. I spent the next few days tightening everything: communication with the therapist, logs of every drop-off and pick-up, follow-up sessions with Elizabeth. I didn't just want to defend myself anymore. I wanted to set boundaries so strong, he couldn't break through them even if he tried. Because if he was going to send letters from the edge, I was going to build a fortress from the center. One that started with truth. And ended with peace. Even if it took everything I had left. The court system isn't built for healing, it's built for decisions. Black and white ones. But life, and family, lives in the gray. And we were drowning in it. The formal complaint about the letter had pushed Mark into a corner. And a man like him, one who thrived on control, doesn't do well cornered. His next move was swift, petty, and designed to rattle me. He filed for emergency visitation rights over spring break. That meant court again. Lawyers again. More hearings. More tension. But this time, it wasn't just about us anymore. It was about the kids falling apart in the fallout. Sarah was now having stomachaches every morning. Real ones, not just nerves. The pediatrician said it was stress-related. Jake had started having nightmares again, calling out in his sleep, "Don't let him take me." I was watching them unravel one thread at a time, while still trying to hold down a job, keep a roof over our heads, and keep myself from breaking in half. "I don't know how much longer I can keep this up," I told Elizabeth one day on the phone, pacing my living room like the floor might open beneath me. "You're holding your line," she said. "He's testing it, pushing. But you're not budging. That's what matters. He's not trying to co-parent. He's trying to win. That's exactly what the judge needs to see." And then came the day that everything tipped. It was a Saturday morning. Jake and Sarah were supposed to be picked up for a weekend visit. But when I answered the door, it wasn't just Mark standing there. It was him and a police officer. "Good morning, ma'am," the officer said. "Mr. Davis has documentation showing that this is his scheduled visitation weekend. He says you're refusing to comply." I stood frozen, panic crashing into my chest like a freight train. "That's not true," I said, my voice trembling. "He's early. And the court ordered pickup from the neutral location, not my home. I have a legal right to see my kids," Mark barked, arms crossed like a schoolyard bully who just brought the principal. The officer glanced at both of us. "Can I see the paperwork?" I ran to grab the custody order, hands shaking, flipping pages until I found the clause: "All pickups and drop-offs to be conducted at the agreed-upon neutral location unless modified in writing." I handed it over. The officer read it slowly. Then he looked at Mark. "Sir, she's right. You're not authorized to pick up here. You'll need to go to the designated exchange site." Mark's face twisted in frustration. "This is ridiculous." "No," I said, finally finding my voice. "This is what boundaries look like. You don't get to just show up at my house with a cop to scare me." He didn't reply. He just turned and stormed off, the officer trailing behind him with an apologetic glance. I closed the door and locked it, then leaned against it, my heart pounding in my ears. Jake was at the top of the stairs. Sarah peeked from behind the hallway wall. They'd heard it. Seen it. Felt it. And I knew, this wasn't just stressful anymore. It was dangerous. I called Elizabeth immediately. "He brought a cop to my front door," I said, my voice shaking. "That's intimidation." "We're filing for an emergency modification first thing Monday," she replied. "This is escalating. The court needs to see it's no longer about parental rights, it's about protection." We compiled everything, the letter, the incident at the door, the therapist's notes, the pediatrician's stress report, the drawings Jake had made. One of them showed a stick-figure dad with a loud, scribbled mouth and two kids hiding behind a smaller figure labeled Mom. Then we made the call. Court. Again. But this time, we weren't just playing defense. We were making a case for restricted visitation. Not to punish. To protect. The hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later. 2 weeks of tiptoeing around the tension. 2 weeks of the kids asking, "Do we have to go to Dad's?" 2 weeks of me preparing for another round of testimony, another room full of strangers deciding what my children needed. But then something unexpected happened. Jake handed me a piece of paper. He was quiet, nervous, shifting from foot to foot. "I wrote something," he said. "For the judge. If I can't say it, maybe I can give it to them." I unfolded the letter slowly. His handwriting was uneven, but clear. "Dear Judge. I don't like going to Dad's house. He's not mean, but he makes me feel bad about Mom. He says stuff that makes me scared. I love my mom and I don't want to live away from her. She always makes me feel safe. Can I stay with her more? Please." I blinked fast, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Jake, are you sure you want to give this to the judge?" He nodded. "I'm not scared anymore." And just like that, I realized something. The fight wasn't wearing us down, it was refining us. Breaking us open, yes, but also making us honest. Brave. Clear. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't even about Mark anymore. It was about peace. And healing. And making sure 2 kids didn't have to spend their childhood being torn in half. So when we walked into court that next time, we weren't just defending a position. We were telling the truth. And this time, the truth had a little boy's name at the top of the page. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The courtroom was quieter than usual that morning. No shouting attorneys, no dramatic objections. Just the soft shuffle of papers, the faint tapping of pens, and a tension that clung to the air like humidity before a thunderstorm. I sat at the petitioner's table beside Elizabeth, hands folded tightly in my lap, the letter from Jake in my purse like a holy relic. He wasn't with me, neither was Sarah. We'd made that decision together. The kids would stay with a family friend, protected from the performance of court. But their voices, or at least Jake's, would still be heard. Mark was already there, looking smug in a gray suit he probably hadn't worn since the last custody hearing. His lawyer leaned in to whisper something, but he didn't look at me. Not once. Just like always, he didn't want a relationship, just a win. The judge entered and we all rose. This time, it was a different judge, not the one from our initial custody case. This one was older, sterner. A woman. Her eyes were sharp, but not unkind. Elizabeth stood. "Your Honor, we're here today to request an emergency modification of the current custody arrangement based on new events that we believe endanger the children's emotional stability and violate the spirit of the court's previous order." She laid out everything clearly and calmly: the unauthorized note from Mark, the incident with the police at my front door, the therapist's documented concerns, and the letter Jake had written. "I also have a signed statement from the child's therapist," Elizabeth said, passing a file to the bailiff. "And with your permission, a letter written by the minor child, Jake Davis, who wishes to have his feelings submitted for the court's review." The judge raised an eyebrow. "How old is the child?" "8, Your Honor." But the therapist confirms he is articulate and understands the situation. His letter was written voluntarily and without coaching. Mark's lawyer stood abruptly. "Objection, Your Honor. We believe the child's statement is inadmissible. At 8 years old, he cannot fully comprehend the legal implications of this situation." The judge looked at him sharply. "We're not asking him to understand legal implications. We're asking how he feels. That, Mr. Klein, is very much admissible in a custody hearing." She held the paper delicately in her hands and began to read. It was surreal, watching a stranger read my son's words aloud. And yet, every line landed like truth laid bare, innocent, raw, impossible to ignore. "Dear Judge, I don't like going to Dad's house. He's not mean, but he makes me feel bad about Mom. He says stuff that makes me scared. I love my mom and I don't want to live away from her. She always makes me feel safe. Can I stay with her more? Please?" When she finished, the courtroom was silent. Mark looked stunned. His jaw clenched, a muscle twitching near his temple. His lawyer leaned in again, whispering with more urgency now. Elizabeth broke the silence. "Your Honor, this is not about alienation. It's about the emotional impact of Mr. Davis's behavior on the children. We are asking for two things: that all visitations become supervised until further therapeutic evaluation can be completed, and that Mr. Davis attend mandatory parenting counseling with a trauma-informed professional." The judge nodded, absorbing every word. Then she turned to Mark. "Mr. Davis, would you like to respond?" He stood slowly, clearly rattled. "I've never hurt my children. Never laid a hand on them. I'm a father trying to stay in his kids' lives. That letter. I don't believe it reflects what really happens during our visits." The judge's gaze was unmoved. "You may not have harmed them physically. But psychological safety is equally critical. Telling an 8-year-old that his mother is lying, that's not parenting. That's pressure." She paused, then continued. "And showing up to her home with law enforcement. That's not co-parenting. That's intimidation." Mark's lips thinned into a bitter line. "She's poisoned them against me." "No," I said, standing slowly, my voice shaking with truth, not anger. "You did. You handed them confusion and expected them to carry it. You used your access to them to push your pain instead of helping them heal. And now, you're losing their trust, not because of me, but because they see what's real." The judge held up a hand to stop further escalation. After a long pause, she spoke. "This court is placing a temporary restriction on unsupervised visitation. Effective immediately, all contact between Mr. Davis and the children will be conducted in a neutral location, under the supervision of a court-appointed social worker. Furthermore, Mr. Davis is required to attend 6 consecutive sessions of parenting education and trauma-informed counseling. Upon completion, this court will re-evaluate the schedule with input from the child therapist." Mark opened his mouth, but the judge continued. "This isn't punishment. It's protection. For the children. And, ultimately, for your relationship with them. You still have a chance to repair that, Mr. Davis. But you need to understand, this court will always prioritize the best interests of the children over the preferences of the parents." Gavel. One sharp knock. And just like that, it was done. I walked out of that courtroom lighter than I had in years. Not because I won, because for once, my son's voice had been heard. And it changed everything. In the car, I called Elizabeth, who was finishing up paperwork back inside. "Do you think it'll hold?" I asked. She didn't hesitate. "Yes. Because you didn't just present a case. You showed the court the truth." That night, I told Jake what happened. He didn't smile, not exactly. But he breathed deeper. Easier. "You're proud of me?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. I pulled him into my arms. "So proud. You told the truth. That's the bravest thing anyone can do." He hugged me back. That hug said more than any letter could. And in that moment, I knew we were going to be okay. Not because the fight was over, but because we'd found our voices. And no one was taking them away again. The house felt different after the court ruling. Not louder. Not busier. Just, quieter. But it wasn't the kind of quiet that came from fear or tension, it was the kind of quiet that comes after a storm has passed. The kind where the wind finally stops howling, and all you hear is the sound of your own breath. Jake and Sarah weren't instantly healed. Of course not. There were still flinches in their voices when Mark's name came up. Still pauses when talking about visits. But there was no more dread in the mornings, no more crying themselves to sleep the night before an exchange. Because now, they knew someone was listening. They knew they mattered. The supervised visit started the following weekend. The court had assigned a neutral facility, one with child-sized chairs, cheerful posters, and trained professionals who knew exactly how to watch without interfering. It wasn't warm or homey, but it was safe. And safe, at that moment, was more than enough. Mark didn't take the news well. He tried to play it cool, but I could see the cracks forming in his voice when he left me voicemails, trying to sound like the victim. "This is ridiculous," he muttered in one. "I feel like a criminal just trying to see my own kids." I didn't answer. I forwarded every message to Elizabeth. Because this wasn't about feelings anymore, this was about actions. And his actions were being watched now. The kids came back from that first supervised visit quiet but not shaken. Sarah said nothing for a while, just clutched her favorite stuffed animal on the drive home. Jake stared out the window. But then, halfway through dinner, Jake looked up and said, "He didn't talk bad about you today." I blinked. "That's good, buddy." "He was kind of boring," Sarah added with a shrug. "But better boring than scary." I laughed softly, because she was right. Sometimes boring is exactly what trauma needs. Predictability. Simplicity. Space to breathe. In the following days, something beautiful began to unfold. Jake started drawing again. Not just doodles, but full scenes, forests, cities, families holding hands. And Sarah began singing again in the bathtub, her off-key renditions of Disney songs echoing through the halls like a signal flare from the other side of pain. Our house, once thick with anxiety, started filling with something else. Hope. One evening, as I was making dinner, Jake came into the kitchen with one of his drawings. "Can we put this on the fridge?" I turned. It was a picture of our family. Me, Jake, Sarah, and even Mark, standing to the side, a little removed, but still in the frame. I nodded. "Of course." He hesitated. "Do you think he can get better?" I knelt down so I was eye level with him. "I don't know, baby," I said honestly. "But I know we're doing better. And that's what matters most right now." That night, I called my sister, the one who'd stayed silent through most of this, unsure how to help, afraid to say the wrong thing. But this time, she picked up after one ring. "I read the court transcript," she said immediately. "Jake's letter. God. I know. I should have called sooner. I didn't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," I told her. "Just, ask me how the kids are. That's always a good place to start." She did. And for the first time in a long time, I told someone the truth without filtering it, without trying to sound stronger than I felt. I cried a little. She cried, too. It felt like coming home. We weren't back to normal, whatever that even meant, but we were finding our rhythm again. A new one. One where the kids felt safe. Where I wasn't always looking over my shoulder. Where boundaries weren't just legal, they were respected. And Mark? He kept going to the supervised visits. Sometimes he seemed stiff. Sometimes a little checked out. But he went. Maybe the structure helped him, or maybe the watchful eyes of a supervisor kept him in line. Either way, he didn't cross any lines again. Not yet. He began attending the court-mandated parenting classes, too, albeit reluctantly. We got updates from the court every 2 weeks. Progress, neutral. No major incidents. Attendance, consistent. Compliance, adequate. It wasn't redemption. But it was a start. And for the first time, I felt like I could take a full breath without it catching halfway up my throat. One night, Sarah asked me the kind of question only a 6-year-old could phrase. Is Daddy gonna stay this kind of daddy or be a better one? I kissed the top of her head. I hope he's trying to be better. That's all anyone can do. And it was true. For so long, I'd carried this fire inside me. This anger, this need for justice, for someone to acknowledge how wrong it all was. But that night, standing in the soft light of my kitchen with the dishwasher humming and my daughter in my arms, I realized something. Justice had come, not in a grand, sweeping way, but in the quiet. In the stability. In the laughter returning. In the fact that my son had written a letter, and someone listened. That was the kind of justice that mattered. Not for me. For them. For a few weeks, things held steady. Jake and Sarah started sleeping through the night again. The tension in the house eased like a slowly deflating balloon. School drop-offs were uneventful. Their laughter, real, belly-deep laughter, returned to the dinner table. On the surface, life was starting to feel normal. But when someone's mask starts to crack, you learn quickly that calm can be an illusion. Mark had been attending his parenting classes. He didn't miss any, according to the court updates. He showed up to the supervised visits, mostly on time, mostly polite. The reports from the facility were bland and professional, no incidents. Limited engagement. No inappropriate language. But something about the way Jake talked after visits began to change again. He keeps saying he's going to fix all this, Jake said one afternoon while we were driving home from the library. I tried to keep my hands steady on the wheel. What do you think he means by that? Jake shrugged. I don't know. He said things are going to go back to the way they should be. That soon, he won't have to talk to people watching him all the time. I exhaled slowly. Mark was setting expectations again, planting seeds. Subtle pressure disguised as hope. I told Elizabeth, of course. She sighed deeply on the other end of the line. He's playing a longer game now. Behaving just enough for the system to see him as compliant, but saying things to the kids that tell a different story. It's a manipulation tactic, grooming their perception, again. What can we do about it? We document. Every word. Every behavioral shift in the kids. Keep working with the therapist. If he slips, even once, we'll be ready. I hung up and stared at the ceiling for a long time that night. I wasn't afraid of court anymore. I was afraid of how much Mark could still shape the way our children saw the world. Their sense of safety. Of truth. Supervised visits continued weekly, but I began noticing little inconsistencies. One Saturday, Jake came home with a new toy car, something I hadn't given him money for. Where did you get this? I asked gently. Dad gave it to me. Said it's a secret reward. The words hit me like a punch. A secret reward? Jake nodded, chewing his lip. For being good. For not telling anyone what we talked about. That night, I sat across from Elizabeth again with the documentation in hand. This is it, isn't it? The beginning of the next spiral. Unfortunately, yes, she said. He's testing boundaries again. We need to file a formal motion to review the visitations. It's coercive behavior. I couldn't believe it. After everything. After the letter. After the judge's ruling. Mark was already poking at the rules, looking for weak spots in the system. And the worst part? Jake was confused all over again. One night, after a supervised visit, I found him sitting on the back porch with his hoodie pulled over his head. His face was pale, eyes distant. I don't know who I'm supposed to believe anymore, he said quietly. I knelt beside him, heart cracking open. What do you mean? Dad says he's trying hard to fix things. But he also says you keep getting in the way. He said you like it when he looks bad. I closed my eyes for a second. The anger rose fast, bitter and hot. But I kept my voice calm. Jake, I don't ever want your dad to look bad. I just want you and Sarah to feel safe. That's all. He didn't answer. But he leaned into me. And I held him like I was holding on to my own sanity. The next day, Elizabeth and I filed for a review of visitation conduct based on emotional coercion. We submitted therapist notes, my logbook, and a new written statement from Jake, not a letter this time, but a transcription from his session. Dad says I have to choose who I believe. That if I trust Mom too much, I'll regret it. He says judges make mistakes. Those were the exact words. And they were enough. The court issued a formal warning. If another instance of emotional coercion was observed or documented, Mark's visitation could be paused entirely, pending psychological evaluation. And that? That was the crack. The mask was slipping. Not for me, for the system. Because now, even the court was starting to see what we'd lived through for years. Mark wasn't confused. He was calculated. He wasn't hurting because he missed his kids. He was hurting because he couldn't control them anymore. The next supervised visit, the monitor's report was different. It said Mark was visibly agitated, that he redirected discussion back to court matters several times, and that Jake appeared withdrawn. We had momentum now. And I could feel something shifting. In the system, yes, but also in me. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was building. Brick by brick. Truth by truth. And this time, I wasn't alone. The cracks in Mark's mask weren't just showing. They were spreading. There's a certain point when even a master manipulator can't keep all the plates spinning. And Mark was running out of hands. The weeks after the court's warning were tense. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just tight, like something was coiling. Waiting. You could feel it in the air around him at the supervised visits. The reports from the monitors became less neutral and more clinical, hinting at the emotional undertow everyone was starting to see. Mr. Davis displayed frustration when the children hesitated to respond to personal questions. Subject redirected the conversation toward legal issues, despite redirection. The children appeared uncomfortable when Mr. Davis discussed returning to full custody. And then, he made a mistake. A big one. It happened on a Tuesday evening visit. Mark was 15 minutes late, which wasn't unusual. But when he walked into the facility that day, something was off. The staff noticed it immediately. His eyes were bloodshot, his gait uneven, and his speech slurred just enough to raise alarms. The visit was terminated on the spot. The supervisor's official note read. Mr. Davis appeared to be under the influence of an unknown substance. For the safety of the children, visitation was ended immediately and a report has been submitted to the court. When the facility director called me, I froze. Are the kids okay? I asked before she could say anything else. They're fine. They hadn't entered the room yet. Staff intercepted before any contact. I held on to the kitchen counter to keep from shaking. This wasn't subtle anymore. This wasn't emotional manipulation. This was danger. Real. Present. Undeniable. Elizabeth called me within the hour. "We've got him," she said flatly. "I'm filing an emergency suspension request right now. Will it stick?" "It'll do more than stick." He crossed the line in a public, documented space. The judge isn't going to look past this. I hung up and collapsed onto the couch. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. Not from sadness. Not from fear. From relief. For so long, it had been my word against his. My gut against his version of reasonable. My quiet truth against his loud performance. But now. Now they saw it. Even if they only saw a glimpse, it was enough. The emergency suspension came through within 48 hours. Visitation rights, paused indefinitely. Reinstatement pending full psychological and substance use evaluation, with a minimum 6-month review period. The kids weren't told the full story, but they understood something had changed. "Are we not seeing Dad for a while?" Sarah asked one night while brushing her teeth. I nodded slowly. "Not for now." "Okay," she said simply, rinsing her mouth. No follow-up questions. No panic. Just peace. Jake, though, was more hesitant. "Is he in trouble?" "He's being asked to get help," I said gently. Jake stared at the floor. "Will it work this time?" I paused, unsure how to answer that. "I don't know, Bud. But what I do know is that you're safe. That we all are." And he nodded. That was enough for him. For now. The house settled into a new rhythm again. No more court dates. No more exchanges. Just mornings filled with cereal and cartoons and backpacks flung across the floor after school. The kind of chaos that belongs in a family. The therapist said both kids were showing signs of stabilization. Jake had stopped mentioning court during sessions. Sarah had drawn a picture of our house with a rainbow over it and the words, "My safe place." I put that one on the fridge too. Weeks passed. Then a month. Then 2. And during that time, we started living again, really living. We went to a baseball game. We took a weekend trip to the lake. The kids made friends. I started sleeping a full 6 hours without jolting awake at 3 a.m., heart racing. Mark was silent. Not a call. Not a motion. Not a knock at the door. Part of me worried he was planning his next move. But part of me hoped he'd finally been forced to look in the mirror. Then, in the middle of May, we got word. Elizabeth texted. "Mark missed his first court-mandated evaluation. The court has moved his case to inactive status unless he re-engages within 60 days. Inactive. That word hit me like the first deep breath after being underwater too long. He was disappearing from the legal system, not erased, but no longer active. No longer pressing forward. No longer controlling the tempo of our lives. I didn't celebrate. But I did stand on the porch that night, wrapped in a hoodie, sipping tea, watching my kids chase fireflies in the backyard. And I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Stillness. It wasn't over. Trauma doesn't work like that. It echoes. Replays. Sneaks up in quiet moments. But we'd reached a kind of peace. Because the truth. Mark couldn't hide anymore. Not behind charm. Not behind courtrooms. Not behind guilt trips. And in his absence, something incredible had emerged. A home. A real one. Not perfect. Not spotless. but full of love and noise and healing. We built it. Together. And nothing, he tried from here on out could take that from us. It had been 3 full months since Mark's last contact. The court had labeled his case inactive. His parenting classes remained unfinished. His evaluations unsubmitted. In the eyes of the system, he was gone, for now. But trauma doesn't take notes from court documents. It has its own memory, its own way of creeping back in even when everything seems fine. And then, one quiet Saturday morning, I opened the mailbox. Inside was a single envelope. No return address. No stamp. Just our family name scrawled in thick, black ink, like it had been dropped off by hand. I froze. It was his handwriting. I didn't open it. Not right away. I just stood there, gripping the paper like it might burn through my skin. Jake and Sarah were still inside, watching cartoons and eating waffles, completely unaware that their past was sitting in my hand. Elizabeth picked up on the second ring. "I got a letter," I said. "From Mark?" I nodded, then realized she couldn't see me. "Yeah. No stamp. Dropped off. Do not read it in front of the kids. Can you scan it and send it to me?" I took a photo and sent it to her before I even walked back inside. She read it while I paced my kitchen. 5 minutes passed before she responded. "We need to talk." My stomach dropped. When we finally got on the phone, her voice was tighter than usual. "It's not overtly threatening," she said, "but it walks right up to the line. He's careful with his words, always is, but he's playing the same psychological game." I already knew that. I'd read it, too. "I know you think you've won. But life has a way of correcting things. I just hope, for their sake, that you're telling them the truth. Kids remember who really tried." A chill went down my spine. It wasn't yelling. It wasn't accusations. It was poison written in calm, clean sentences. Subtle. Calculated. Exactly how Mark worked. "I'm reporting it," Elizabeth said. "It's unsolicited contact in a pending custody matter, and depending on how the judge views it, we can argue it violates the no-contact terms embedded in the visitation pause. But he didn't send it through the mail. There's no proof it was him. We'll submit it anyway. The implication is clear. If he's watching your house, that's enough to raise a red flag." I hung up, locked every door, and double-checked the backyard even though I knew he wasn't there. But it wasn't about seeing him. It was about feeling him again. That letter rewound progress. Jake started waking up in the middle of the night again. He didn't say why, he never does, but I knew. Sarah got quieter. Drawings that had once been full of bright colors returned to gray pencil outlines and hesitant little frowns. He hadn't even spoken to them. But somehow, his presence lingered. A few days later, the therapist called me with concern. "Jake mentioned he thinks his dad is going to show up again," she said. "He said, I don't think he's gone for good." She paused. "He's right to feel that." I sighed into the receiver. "I don't know what to tell him anymore." "Tell him you're watching. That you see what he sees. That you believe him. Because that's what keeps kids tethered when the world feels like it might break." So that night, I sat beside him on the edge of his bed. "I heard you told Dr. Mara you think Dad might come back." Jake didn't look at me. Just nodded. "I want you to know something," I said. "You don't have to guess what's going to happen next. If something changes, I'll tell you. I won't keep secrets. And if anyone ever makes you feel unsafe again, you come to me. Always." He whispered, "Even if it's Dad. Especially if it's Dad." That night, he didn't wake up. Neither did I. But the quiet wasn't the same anymore. It wasn't peace, it was vigilance. A week later, Elizabeth called with news. We submitted the letter and filed a restraining order request. The judge has reviewed the situation, including the substance use incident, the missed evaluations, and now the letter. He's issuing a permanent suspension of visitation rights. If Mark wants to change that in the future, he'll have to petition from scratch. I sat down hard. A permanent suspension. Not just paused. Cut off. He won't take that well, I said quietly. No. He won't, Elizabeth replied. But it's not about him. It never was. I looked out the window. The kids were in the backyard again. Sarah was chasing butterflies with a net too small to catch anything, and Jake was building something with sticks and rocks. A fortress, maybe. A safe place. They didn't know that a gavel had just given them something no child should ever have to fight for, safety from their own father. And I didn't know how to feel. It wasn't celebration. It wasn't grief. It was just a release. Later that night, I took the letter from where I'd hidden it in the back of the kitchen drawer. I read it one more time. Every word was designed to make me question myself. To pull me back into the old spiral. To undo everything. Then I lit a match. The paper curled and blackened, Mark's words reduced to ashes in the sink. Some ghosts don't need to be fought. They just need to be buried. And for the first time, I didn't feel haunted. The months after the permanent suspension of visitation passed quietly. Almost too quietly. It felt like the calm after a storm, one so loud and fierce that the sudden silence was jarring. But in that silence, I found something I'd lost, peace. The kids had adjusted. We'd adjusted. The heavy weight of what-ifs had begun to fade, replaced with the steady rhythm of daily life, mornings filled with breakfast chatter, school pickups, trips to the park, and lazy evenings spent reading or watching movies together. Jake and Sarah started to laugh more. Real laughter. The kind that made my heart feel lighter, like the world wasn't a place of looming threats, but of small moments worth cherishing. There were still moments of hesitation. Jake would sometimes look out the window, as if expecting someone to appear. But when he saw me watching, he'd give a small, reassuring smile. That was enough. We were making it. Not just surviving, thriving. One day, a month after the letter, Jake came home with a big smile, holding a piece of paper in his hands. "Mom, look." "I made the honor roll," he said, practically glowing with pride. The paper was filled with his teacher's handwritten praises, and at the bottom was a gold star. I took the paper from him, my heart swelling. "This is amazing, buddy. You worked hard for this." "I did," he said. "And I think it's because I'm finally feeling like me again." Tears prickled at the corners of my eyes. This was it. This was the moment I'd been waiting for, the one where my son, my brave, strong son, finally started to feel like himself again. Unburdened. Free. Sarah bounced in, holding up a painting she'd done for school. It was of a big, bright sun above a house, with the words "Home" written in bold letters. It was simple, but it hit me like a wave. "This is us, Mom," she said, grinning. "It's our house." I pulled her into a hug, clutching both kids tightly, like I could hold all the years we'd lost and the years we had yet to gain in that one moment. And that's when I knew, this was the new normal. Not perfect, but good. Solid. The kind of normal I'd wanted for them. For me. For us. But life, as it always does, kept moving. With the dust settled, the days no longer dominated by court hearings or looming threats, I began to look toward the future with a new sense of purpose. I realized I had spent years putting my life on hold, waiting for the right time to start over. Waiting for some magical moment when everything would align. But I had all I needed already. I'd been given a second chance. A chance to build a life free from fear. A chance to show my children what strength really meant, not in fighting battles, but in choosing peace. In moving forward, no matter how small the steps. The kids were doing well. They were finally flourishing. Sarah had made new friends at school. Jake was excelling in his studies and even trying his hand at soccer. It was as though they were starting fresh, building a new version of themselves, one they weren't afraid to be. As for me, I was learning to breathe again. To trust myself again. To live again. It wasn't easy. I had my moments. Late nights when my mind would wander, and I'd catch myself thinking of Mark, what he was doing, where he was, if he was even trying to get back into their lives. But I refused to let those moments dominate me. I couldn't. Not when everything I had worked for, everything I had fought for, was finally right in front of me. In those moments, I reminded myself of the most important thing: we are okay. We are free. The hardest part was over. And now, the only thing left to do was to keep living. A year passed. The letter from Mark, the last piece of contact we had ever received, was long gone. The memories of the chaos that had once consumed our lives began to fade into the background, replaced by new stories. New adventures. A new chapter. One Saturday morning, after we had made pancakes as a family and laughed over spilled syrup, I found myself staring out the window. The kids were outside again, playing in the yard, their voices carrying through the open window. And for the first time in years, I felt the weight of the past truly slip away. The past didn't define us anymore. What defined us now was the life we'd built, the bond we'd forged in the fire of everything we'd survived. I wasn't just a survivor anymore. I was a builder. I had created a home that was secure, filled with love, and brimming with possibility. And that was more than enough. I'd always feared what would happen if Mark came back into our lives. If he'd somehow managed to tear apart the fragile piece I'd worked so hard to create. But now, I saw things differently. The truth was, I didn't need his permission to be a good parent. I didn't need his approval to raise my kids in a safe, loving home. And I didn't need to fear his return anymore. The only thing I needed was this moment. Right here. Right now. I watched Sarah chase after a butterfly with a net that was far too small, and Jake, once again, building another rock fortress, this time with a smile that radiated the confidence he hadn't had before. I realized then that this was what freedom looked like. And I was finally, truly, free. It's strange how time has a way of making things seem both distant and close all at once. One evening, about a year after the court's final decision, I sat in my favorite chair by the window, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The colors in the sky were breathtaking, deep purples and oranges, like a painting someone had carefully brushed across the canvas of the world. The kids were outside again, running around with their friends. Their laughter, the sound of pure joy, filled the air. I took a deep breath and felt a surge of gratitude. Not for what I'd won, but for what I'd finally found, the ability to live without the constant weight of worry. For so long, I had been living in a place of waiting. Waiting for Mark's next move. Waiting for the next court date. Waiting for the other shoe to drop. But now, I wasn't waiting anymore. I wasn't looking over my shoulder, hoping I hadn't missed something. I wasn't afraid of the unknown. I had found peace in the present. It wasn't always easy to embrace the present, though. Some nights, I'd lie awake, my mind drifting back to those dark, endless days when everything had felt so fragile. I had carried so much fear for so long that sometimes, even now, I could almost taste it again, that gnawing uncertainty. The doubt that had clouded my every thought, the fear that I wasn't strong enough to protect my kids, that I wasn't enough. But I had proved something to myself. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. And my kids were thriving with me. I saw it in the way Sarah's eyes sparkled when she shared her latest school project, or the way Jake would excitedly tell me about his progress in soccer, his voice full of pride and confidence. They had finally found their footing. They had the freedom to be children again, to dream, to laugh, to run without fear. And it wasn't just them. I had changed too. I had rediscovered the woman I had been before Mark, the one who had dreams and goals beyond the suffocating roles of wife and mother. The woman who could stand on her own 2 feet, without needing validation from anyone. I wasn't broken anymore. I wasn't a victim. I was a woman who had fought and won, not just for herself, but for her children. The therapist had been right when she said I needed to find my own identity again. It hadn't been easy, and it had taken longer than I'd hoped. But now, I was beginning to understand the importance of not just surviving the storms, but of learning how to navigate through them with grace. I had started taking yoga classes. I was reading more, not just books about parenting or legal matters, but books that filled my soul, books that reminded me who I was outside of all the noise. I was learning to be present in my own life. Sometimes, I'd sit at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, my kids bustling around me, and just breathe. I'd listen to them talk, their voices a constant reminder of the love and joy I had fought so hard for. And I realized, more than ever, that love, real, unconditional love, had been our greatest weapon in this fight. But life, as it does, kept moving forward. One day, I received a letter from the court. My heart skipped a beat as I read the heading, Notice of Termination of Legal Proceedings. It was from Mark's legal team. He was officially giving up his battle for custody. It was the final, undeniable end of the saga. I sat there for a moment, the paper trembling slightly in my hands. I had known this was coming, but still, seeing it in black and white, seeing the words that marked the end of a chapter one had never wanted to write. It felt surreal. Mark's legal team had cited lack of engagement and failure to meet court-mandated requirements as the reasons for his decision to step away. And while that part of me that had once feared his return felt a strange sense of closure, there was something else in me, something softer, quieter. Grief. It wasn't grief for what we'd lost. It wasn't even grief for what Mark had taken from us. No, this was different. This was a quiet sorrow for the version of myself and my children that had once been filled with hope, only to have it shattered by the weight of reality. But that grief, though real, was short-lived. It didn't consume me. Because I had learned to embrace the new version of our lives. The one that wasn't tethered to the past. The one where we had the chance to write our own future. That evening, I called Elizabeth to let her know about the letter. Her voice was warm and supportive, as always. "You did it," she said simply. "You got through it. And so did they." I smiled, a little sadly. "We did, didn't we? We'll keep moving forward. Together." And that's when I realized that the greatest victory of all wasn't in the legal wins, the battles I'd fought in courtrooms, or the strategies I'd employed. No, the greatest victory was the one I could see right in front of me, every day. It was in the laughter of my kids. It was in their confidence, their resilience. It was in the way they held on to me when the world seemed too big, and the way they trusted me to lead them into a future filled with endless possibilities. They were free. I was free. We were free. And no one, no matter how hard they tried, could ever take that away from us. As the years passed, our life grew richer. We went on family trips, explored new hobbies, and lived fully, without looking back. And though Mark's shadow had once loomed large over our family, it was finally gone. We had found our own light, and nothing, could dim that. I wasn't just the woman I had been before all of this. I was the woman who had built something stronger, something better. A mother, a protector, a warrior who knew what it truly meant to fight for what mattered. And, more than anything, I knew that the best was yet to come. It was early spring when I finally decided to make the change. I had been thinking about it for months, mulling over the idea in the quiet spaces between our busy days. It wasn't a grand gesture, nor was it something that would fix all the pieces of my life. But it was something I needed, something that would anchor me to the present in a deeper, more meaningful way. A way to move beyond the struggle and into a life that didn't just survive, but thrived. I enrolled in a part-time graduate program. It wasn't something I had even considered before the turmoil of the last few years. Before the custody battles, before Mark's manipulative games, before the endless court hearings. But somewhere along the way, through the pain and the growth, I had discovered something about myself. I wanted to learn again. I wanted to create a future not just for my kids, but for me, too. I didn't need to build an empire, or be recognized on a stage. But I wanted to build something that would leave an imprint. A legacy of resilience, determination, and love. A life that would show my children what it meant to rise above the storm, to walk through fire and still come out stronger on the other side. The kids didn't fully understand at first. They were still wrapped in their own world of after-school projects and soccer practices, and I didn't want to burden them with the pressure of my decisions. But I could see the shift in them. They were proud of me, in their own way. They knew that I was more than just the mom who took care of everything. I was the woman who had fought for them, and now I was fighting for myself, too. Jake came to me one afternoon after school with a small, folded note in his hand. "This is for you, Mom," he said, handing it over shyly. I unfolded the paper and found a simple drawing of me and him and Sarah, with the words "Supermom" written in bold letters across the top. The drawing was sweet, unpolished, but full of love. "Jake, this is amazing," I said, giving him a big hug. "Thank you." He beamed, his eyes full of pride. "I made it because you're always doing things for us. But I think you should do something for yourself now, too." Those words hit me harder than I expected. He didn't just see me as the caretaker or the protector. He saw me as a person who deserved more. Who needed more. And that moment, that simple, heartfelt gesture, was a reminder that my journey wasn't just about survival. It was about growth. About learning how to stand on my own again. And that's exactly what I was doing. The first few weeks of school were a whirlwind. Balancing my studies with the kids' routines was no easy feat, but I welcomed the challenge. I found myself poring over books late at night after the kids were in bed, taking notes, brainstorming ideas. It was thrilling. But it was also humbling. I realized how much I had missed out on during those years of focusing solely on survival. My own dreams had been tucked away, buried beneath the weight of what had happened to us. And now, I was digging them out again. One assignment, one class, one small step at a time. There were moments of doubt. Moments when I wondered if I was making the right choice. Could I really juggle everything? Could I maintain the delicate balance of being there for my children while still pushing forward in my own life? But then I looked at my kids, their smiles and laughter filling our home, and I knew. I wasn't just doing this for me. I was doing this for them, too. I was showing them that it was never too late to change, never too late to grow, and never too late to dream. The months flew by. I completed my first semester with more success than I'd anticipated, and as the weather began to shift from the chilly breeze of spring to the warm glow of summer, I found myself reflecting on everything that had changed. When I first left Mark, I never thought I would find peace. I never thought I would find a way to put the pieces of my life back together. But with every day that passed, I learned that peace wasn't something you found. It was something you created. One choice at a time. And in every choice I made, to protect my children, to trust myself again, to pursue my own dreams, I was building something far more powerful than any fear or loss could ever be. A new beginning. It was one evening in late June when we sat down for dinner, the kids talking about their summer plans and the adventures they wanted to have, when Jake looked up at me from across the table. "Mom," he said, his voice serious for the first time in a while, "I think we should go to the beach this summer." The words hit me like a wave, and for a moment, I could see it all, the three of us standing at the edge of the ocean, the wind in our hair, our feet sinking into the sand. "We can do that," I said, smiling. "We can do anything." It wasn't just about the beach, or the sand, or the waves. It was about the fact that we could look ahead with hope. For the first time in a long time, I didn't see a future clouded by uncertainty. I saw an open horizon. A space where we could move forward, unburdened by the past. It wasn't a perfect life. It was messy and complicated, full of challenges and setbacks. But it was our life. And it was beautiful. As I watched my children talk about their plans for the summer, the things they wanted to explore, the places they wanted to go, I realized that we had already made it. We had made it through the worst, and now we were free to live. And that was everything. The sun had barely risen, casting a soft golden glow over our small town, and I was already up. I sat on the porch, the cool morning air brushing against my face, a hot cup of coffee in my hands. This was my moment, the quiet before the world started bustling with activity. I'd come to cherish these early mornings, where the weight of the past seemed a little lighter and the promise of the day ahead felt fresh. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about living. It was about thriving. I had come a long way since the days when I could barely lift my head, when the weight of my past felt too heavy to bear. I had been consumed by the fight, by the battle to keep my kids safe, by the legal system, by the never-ending worry of whether Mark would succeed in tearing our family apart. But somewhere along the way, I realized that my life was so much more than the battles I fought. It was about finding joy in the small things, about rediscovering the woman I had been before it all began. The morning was calm, but my mind was anything but. I had spent the past few months juggling school, the kids, and everything else life had thrown my way. It hadn't been easy, but I had found a rhythm. And with each passing day, I could feel myself growing stronger. My confidence was no longer tied to the constant need for validation from anyone else. It came from within. And as I sat there, letting the quiet seep into me, I realized that the most important thing I had discovered wasn't in the courtroom or in the lessons from my graduate program. It was the strength to simply be. To be present. To be whole. To be at peace with the person I had become. The kids were growing too, each day revealing new parts of their personalities, new talents, and new dreams. I marveled at how they had flourished, Sarah with her love of reading, her eyes always buried in a book, and Jake, who had started his own little soccer league in the neighborhood. They were becoming the people I always hoped they would be, confident, kind, and full of hope. But I also saw the subtle scars they carried. They weren't visible, but I knew they were there. And it was in those moments, when I noticed a hesitation in their eyes or the way they clung to me just a little longer at night, that I remembered how far we had all come. The trauma we had endured together had shaped us, yes, but it hadn't broken us. We were stronger than we had ever been before, and I had a new sense of responsibility, not just to protect them, but to help them process everything we had been through. It wasn't just about fighting the battles anymore. It was about teaching them how to handle the scars, to wear them with pride, as badges of resilience. One evening, I decided it was time to sit down with the kids. We had spent so much time moving forward, focusing on the present, but I knew we needed to have a conversation about the past. A conversation that would help us all heal. Sarah, Jake, I said, my voice steady but gentle as they sat across from me at the kitchen table, there's something I've been thinking about for a while. And I think it's important for us to talk. They both stopped what they were doing and turned to look at me. I could see the curiosity in their eyes, but also a slight nervousness. What is it, Mom? Jake asked, his brow furrowed slightly. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. I know that we've been through a lot. And I know that sometimes, it might feel like things are behind us. But I want you both to know that it's okay to talk about what happened. It's okay to feel sad or angry about it. We're not leaving those feelings behind, we're just learning how to live with them. I saw Sarah's eyes soften, her usual confident demeanor giving way to vulnerability. She nodded slowly, as if processing what I had said. I get it, Mom, she said quietly. Sometimes, I feel like I should be over it, but I'm not sure I am. Jake's face, usually full of energy, grew serious. Me neither. Sometimes I think about everything, and it just makes me really mad. I nodded, my heart aching for them, but also swelling with pride. It's okay to be angry. It's okay to be sad. But what I want you to know is this: you're not alone. You never have been. And you don't have to carry that weight by yourself. For the first time, I saw them both let go, just a little. They didn't have to say much. Their eyes met mine, and in that simple, unspoken exchange, I knew that we were healing together. The past didn't have to define us anymore. We could talk about it, acknowledge it, and move forward, as a family. In the months that followed, we grew even closer. The therapy sessions continued, not just for me but for all of us. It wasn't easy, and there were days when the emotions came crashing down, but we always came out the other side stronger. I started to see the change in myself too. My confidence grew in unexpected ways. I had learned to let go of the idea that I had to be everything to everyone, that I had to be perfect. I had learned to embrace the messiness of life, the imperfections, and the quiet victories that came with them. And most importantly, I had learned that resilience wasn't just about bouncing back from hardship. It was about growing through it. It was about finding strength in the face of adversity, and, above all, it was about choosing joy in spite of everything. One day, as I sat at the kitchen table, my laptop open to an essay I was writing for school, Jake came over to me with a small, folded note. "Mom," he said shyly, "I wrote this for you." I took the note, unfolding it carefully. It was a letter, short but powerful. "Dear Mom. I think you're the strongest person I know. You've been through so much and never gave up. I'm proud of you. You taught me how to never give up, no matter what. I love you. Jake." I blinked back tears, my heart swelling. "Thank you, sweetie," I whispered, pulling him into a tight hug. And in that moment, I realized something profound. The legacy I had worried about building, the future I had worked so hard for, was already being created, in these quiet, everyday moments. In the strength we showed each other. In the way we moved forward, together. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about thriving. And I couldn't wait to see where this journey would take us next. The summer months passed quickly, and before we knew it, school was starting again. The kids had their backpacks packed and their minds set on new adventures. For me, it was another chapter in this long journey of rediscovery. But there was something different about this year. Something had shifted in the way I saw the world, and in the way I saw myself. As I dropped the kids off at school, I felt a sense of calm I hadn't experienced in a long time. Maybe it was the fact that we were now in a good place, or maybe it was simply the knowledge that we had survived the worst and come out stronger. Whatever it was, I knew we were ready for whatever came next. But life, as always, had its way of testing us. And just when I thought we were in the clear, Mark reappeared. It wasn't as dramatic as the last time he came into our lives like a storm. This time, it was more subtle, more insidious. I found a message on my phone one evening, just as I was getting ready to wind down for bed. The message was short, but its intent was clear: Mark was going to challenge the custody agreement again. For a moment, I froze. I had spent so many sleepless nights worrying about this very thing, him coming back, trying to drag us through the mud again. I thought we were done with him, that we had finally found peace. But now, the idea of going through the court battles again felt like a punch in the gut. I sat there for a long time, staring at the screen, trying to calm my racing thoughts. I knew this wasn't the same as before. I had changed. The kids had changed. We had built a life where we didn't have to be constantly looking over our shoulders. But I also knew that Mark wouldn't stop. He was relentless, and he would do whatever it took to get what he wanted. And if that meant dragging us back into a legal battle, he would do it without hesitation. I took a deep breath, letting the anger and fear settle into the back of my mind. It was time to face this head-on. The next few weeks were a blur of legal consultations and paperwork. Mark's lawyer was as aggressive as ever, throwing accusations at me and demanding more time with the kids. The emotional toll it took on me was far greater than I expected, and for the first time in a long time, I questioned my strength. I wasn't sure I could do this again. But I couldn't give up. Not now. Not when everything I had worked for was at stake. The kids seemed to sense the tension in the air, and though they didn't know the full extent of what was happening, I could tell they were starting to feel the weight of it too. Sarah asked more questions than usual, wondering if everything was going to be okay. Jake was quieter, his eyes sometimes too serious for a boy his age. One night, after a particularly tough day of meetings and phone calls, I sat them down and explained, as gently as I could, what was happening. "There's going to be some changes," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're going to have to go to court again. But I want you both to know that I'm doing everything I can to make sure you're okay." Sarah nodded, her brow furrowed. "Are we going to be okay, Mom?" I took a deep breath. "Yes, sweetie. We'll be okay. We always are." Jake, ever the protector, looked at me with determination in his eyes. "We've made it this far, right? We'll be fine." His words brought a small smile to my face, but inside, my heart ached. I wanted so badly to protect them from all of this, from the pain, the uncertainty, the stress. But I knew I couldn't shield them from everything. What I could do was show them that even when life threw the hardest challenges our way, we could face them together. The days leading up to the court hearing felt like a blur. I spent hours preparing, meeting with my lawyer, organizing evidence, and gathering documents. Every moment felt like a battle, but I couldn't afford to let myself crumble. I had too much at stake. The night before the hearing, I found myself unable to sleep. I stood by the window, looking out into the darkness, feeling the weight of everything that was happening. I had faced so much in the past few years, but this was different. This time, I wasn't just fighting for survival. I was fighting for my children's future, for their sense of stability, for their sense of safety. And I knew I couldn't let Mark take that away from them. I didn't have the answers, and I didn't know what the future held. But in that moment, I realized that I had already won in so many ways. I had built a life that was mine, a life where my children were loved and cared for, where we could move forward together. And no one, not even Mark, could take that away. The day of the hearing was long and tense. We sat in the cold, sterile courtroom, the air thick with anticipation. Mark's lawyer was ruthless, trying to twist every word I said, every piece of evidence I presented. But I held my ground. I didn't let them intimidate me. As the hearing went on, I could feel the exhaustion setting in. But I also knew this was it. This was the moment I had been fighting for all along. I wasn't going to let Mark take my children away. Not now. Not ever. When the judge finally spoke, I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. "We will maintain the current custody arrangement," the judge said, her voice firm. "There is no evidence to suggest that any change is necessary." Relief flooded through me, and I almost collapsed in my seat. It was over. For now, at least. That evening, after the court decision, I gathered the kids in the living room. They were nervous but hopeful, waiting to hear what had happened. "We're okay," I said, my voice breaking as I held back tears. "We're okay. The judge ruled in our favor. We're staying together." They rushed into my arms, their relief as palpable as mine. In that moment, I realized that no matter what life threw at us, we could face it, because we had each other. And that was all we ever needed. We didn't know what the future would bring, but we had made it through the hardest test yet. And that was enough. The weeks following the court hearing were filled with a quiet sense of relief. The fear that had been hanging over us for so long had finally lifted, and with it came a new clarity. For the first time in ages, I felt like I could breathe, truly breathe. The weight that had been dragging me down for years had finally started to fade, and in its place was a sense of peace that I hadn't known was possible. I spent the next few days doing what I hadn't had the chance to do in so long, just being present with my kids. We spent lazy afternoons at the park, playing soccer, and riding bikes. There were no looming deadlines or court dates to worry about, no fear of losing everything we had fought for. For the first time in a long while, we were simply living. Sarah was more talkative than usual, telling me about the new friends she had made at school and the latest book she had finished reading. Her voice was full of excitement, and I could see the spark in her eyes, the same spark I remembered from when she was younger, before everything had become so complicated. Jake, too, was more at ease. His usual energy had returned, and he had even started planning a little project for the neighborhood kids. Something he'd wanted to do for a while but never had the chance. He was still the same boy who had stood by me during our darkest days, but now he had this new sense of freedom, of hope. And I, for the first time in what felt like forever, began to think about my future. I had always dreamed of going back to school, of finishing my degree and building a career that was mine, something I could be proud of. But after everything that had happened, it had seemed like an impossible goal. Yet here I was, with a new sense of purpose and clarity. I had worked hard to get this far, and I wasn't about to let fear or doubt stop me now. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about thriving. I had spent so many years focusing solely on the needs of my children, on making sure they were safe, that they were okay, that I had forgotten about myself. But now, as I looked at my kids, I realized that my own happiness and growth mattered too. After all, I was their role model. I wanted them to see that life wasn't just about surviving the tough times, it was about embracing the good ones and creating a future we could all be proud of. I enrolled in a part-time evening program at the local university, something I had always wanted to do. The thought of juggling school, work, and being a mother was daunting, but I was ready for the challenge. And with the support of my kids, who had been my unwavering backbone through everything, I knew I could do it. I wasn't just a mother anymore. I was a woman rediscovering who she was and what she was capable of. As time passed, I found myself slowly starting to rebuild the parts of my life that had been left in ruins. I began to rekindle old friendships, some of which had been strained or neglected during the darkest days. I also found new friendships with women who, like me, were navigating the challenges of being a single parent, of balancing their ambitions with the needs of their children. I had always felt a little isolated, believing that no one could truly understand what I had been through. But now, I realized that the strength I had gained came not just from fighting my own battles, but from connecting with others who had walked similar paths. There was a profound sense of solidarity in that, knowing I wasn't alone in this journey. The relationships I had with the kids grew even stronger. Our communication was more open, more honest. I could see the ways in which we had all grown, how we had each healed, and how we had begun to thrive. One day, as I sat in my living room, working on a paper for school while the kids played in the backyard, I felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude wash over me. I looked at the life we had built. A life filled with laughter, love, and even moments of quiet reflection. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't without its challenges. But it was ours. I had spent so many years focused on surviving, on simply getting through each day. But now, I realized that survival was only part of the equation. It was about growth. It was about rebuilding and finding strength in the face of adversity. It was about finding joy, even in the small moments. I wasn't the same person I had been before everything fell apart. I was stronger, more resilient, and more determined than I had ever been. But I had also learned something incredibly valuable: I didn't have to do it all on my own. There were moments when I felt like I couldn't keep going, when the weight of everything seemed too heavy to bear. But I had learned to reach out, to lean on the people who cared about me, and to trust in the support around me. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had made me realize just how powerful community and connection could be. My relationship with the kids, too, had deepened in ways I couldn't have imagined. We had survived the storm together, and we were stronger for it. The love we shared wasn't just about keeping each other safe. It was about understanding, supporting, and encouraging each other to grow. And as I looked toward the future, I knew that this was only the beginning. There would be more challenges ahead, more bumps in the road. But I was no longer afraid of them. I had faced the hardest battles of my life and come out on the other side. I had survived. But more than that, I had grown. And now, it was time to thrive. As the weeks turned into months, the future started to feel a little brighter. I continued to pursue my degree, juggling school with raising my kids and managing my job. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it. And through it all, I learned something important, that every chapter of life, no matter how difficult, holds within it the potential for growth. It's not the hardships we face that define us, it's how we rise above them, how we use them to build the life we want to live. With each passing day, I knew that we were building something beautiful. A future where anything was possible. The end of the semester was fast approaching, and with it came a realization: I had made it through one of the most challenging times of my life, and I was coming out stronger on the other side. The kids were thriving, and so was I. But even as we entered this new chapter, there was still one final piece to put in place. I had spent so much of my energy in the past few years surviving, navigating the chaos that Mark had left behind. I had fought tooth and nail for custody, for peace, for stability, and now, with all of that behind us, I was beginning to see the bigger picture. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about creating a life that was full, rich, and filled with the kind of joy I'd always dreamed of. Sarah had finally started to feel settled again. She was making friends who treated her like family, and her grades had improved drastically since the emotional burden of the legal battles had lifted. Jake, too, was thriving. He had a confidence about him that hadn't been there before, and his smile, the one that used to be shadowed by worry, now shone brighter than ever. And me? I was on my way to graduating, working toward my degree, and feeling proud of how far I had come. There were still sleepless nights, still moments of doubt, but they were far fewer than before. I had learned to embrace the uncertainty of the future and to appreciate the progress I had made, step by step. As the days grew longer and the school year came to a close, we started to plan a trip, a long-awaited vacation that we had never been able to take before. It was something simple, but it was ours. We decided to spend a week in the mountains, away from everything, where we could just be together and enjoy the peace that had been so hard-earned. The kids couldn't wait. They were already dreaming of hikes, fishing trips, and late-night campfires. But even as I looked forward to our little getaway, I found myself thinking back to everything we had been through. The court battles, the uncertainty, the fear that had once clouded my every step. And then I thought about how we had overcome it all, together. It had taken time, but we had built a new foundation. One that was steady, strong, and full of hope. The morning of our departure was chaotic in the best way possible. The car was packed to the brim with suitcases, snacks, and camping gear. Jake was bouncing around, asking if we could leave yet, while Sarah was double-checking everything, making sure we had all the essentials. As I watched them both, I couldn't help but smile. They were so full of life, so full of energy and joy. It felt like a dream come true, one that I had worked for, fought for, and finally earned. This trip wasn't just a vacation, it was a symbol of everything we had worked through and everything we had yet to accomplish. On the drive, the kids sang along to their favorite songs, the sound of their voices filling the car with an energy that made me feel like we were starting a whole new chapter, one filled with adventures and discoveries. As we pulled up to our cabin in the mountains, the peacefulness of the place hit me. The air was fresh and crisp, the trees towering above us in all their majestic beauty. It was quiet here. So quiet that for the first time in a long time, I could hear my own thoughts clearly. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the weight of the past on my shoulders. Instead, I felt light. Free. I was beginning to realize that healing wasn't just about overcoming the struggles we face, it was about embracing the life we create after the storm has passed. Over the course of the week, we spent our days exploring the wilderness, hiking to waterfalls, and sitting around campfires, talking about life. There were moments of quiet reflection, but also moments of laughter and pure joy. The kids were in their element, and I was finally able to relax, to let go of the constant tension that had gripped me for so long. One evening, as we sat by the campfire, Sarah turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Mom," she said, her voice soft, "do you think we've finally found our peace?" I looked at her, her face glowing in the firelight. There was a quiet wisdom in her eyes, a wisdom that came from all the things she had experienced, even at her young age. "We have, sweetie," I said, my voice full of emotion. "We've worked hard for it. But more than that, we've earned it. And now, we get to enjoy it." Jake, ever the dreamer, piped up from the other side of the fire. "Yeah, and we get to have even more adventures. Like, maybe next summer, we'll go to the beach." I laughed. "That's a great idea, Jake. We'll see what we can do." And for the first time in what felt like forever, I realized something: the future wasn't something to be afraid of anymore. It wasn't a place filled with fear and uncertainty. It was a place where anything was possible, where we could create the life we wanted. As the fire died down and the stars above us began to twinkle, I felt a deep sense of gratitude for everything we had gone through, the trials, the heartaches, the struggles. They had all led us to this moment, to this life. And while I couldn't change the past, I knew that we had all grown from it. I looked at my children, their faces illuminated by the warm glow of the fire, and realized that the love we had shared had carried us through. It had been the one constant, the one thing that had never wavered, no matter how dark the storm had seemed. This wasn't just the end of a story. It was the beginning of something even more beautiful, a life filled with love, laughter, and the promise of a future where anything was possible. As I sat there in the stillness of the mountains, surrounded by the people I loved most, I finally understood. Life wasn't about avoiding the storms. It was about learning to dance in the rain, to find peace even when the world around you felt chaotic. It was about embracing the love that had carried us through, and knowing that no matter what came next, we were ready for it. And with that, I knew, we had come full circle. The journey that had started with so much pain, so much uncertainty, had led us to this point. This beautiful, peaceful moment of quiet reflection. The future was ours. And we were ready for it. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?